Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. I'm Andrea Olvera. I work with Meals on Wheels of Central Texas in-home care. We provide the caregiver and attendant services. We provide services to our seniors and adults with disabilities in the greater Austin area. And we help with things like light housekeeping, transportations to doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, respite for family members. So feel free to reach out to us as needed. And also hosting with us is Lloyd Wilson from Sonder Hospice. Welcome, Lloyd. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Lloyd Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Sonder Hospice, based here in Austin, Texas. It's focused on personalized, compassionate care for folks with advanced illnesses and need care in the home. So, Andrea, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and introduce our esteemed speakers.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Well, today I'm really excited about the topics that we are going to be covering. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because I see the impact it makes every single day on families and patients' lives. We have really two ends of the spectrum. From a patient advocacy standpoint, we have Garrick Colwell, who is interacting every day with families across Texas. He is the CEO and president and founder of Kitchen Table Conversations, which he founded with his late wife, Kinsley Colwell. They founded it together to be able to provide and empower end-of-life conversations for loved ones and healthcare providers so that they can legally document their wishes and make sure that their choices are honored and respected. Since founding it, he's given thousands of presentations, has, I think, on his docket this year, thousands more to give, and is somebody who really is great about going into people's homes and understanding what's important to them. Cesar Lopez, we're very fortunate to have, is a leading expert in the state of Texas on end-of-life issues. He's a general counsel at Texas Hospital Association who is actively engaged in shaping policy and legal matters. It gets very involved when these things come to a head and when the legal documentation or the issues are a little bit more ambiguous or in higher profile. He's dealt with some of the big picture cases you see on the front page of the news from time to time. So he can really, he really can speak to what it's like from the hospital standpoint, what it's like from the policy and legal standpoint, and how it all pulls together. So it's just again, amazing group, and very excited to be able to learn from them today.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. All right, let's begin by talking about what we're here to talk about, which is preparing for the future, what everyone should know about advanced care planning. Let's see here. Let's see if I can make this slideshow work. That would be a nice thing. Here we go. So our agenda today is we're going to talk about what advanced care planning is, why advanced care planning is important, and we're going to introduce you to the 3 Ds of advanced care planning: how to decide, discuss, and document your end-of-life wishes. So what is advanced care planning? And as we go along, it's important for you guys to ask questions as we go, ask for clarification, just kind of dive in so we can make this as interactive as it serves you best, because that's what we're here for, is to make sure you walk away with the information that's most important to you. You have these slides all in your handouts. There's 3 up slides on each page, so you can make notes as we go. What I'd like to do is share with you a video that was produced by the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization that kind of gives us a perspective on what advanced care planning is.
I'll start when we were children. Liz and I have known each other since we were kids, and we kind of got together 30 years later. I was diagnosed about 8 years ago with prostate cancer that was spread to the bone, which is stage 4. It was important for me to plan ahead with the advance directive because I didn't want to burden family members, of course, for me and also my wife. I don't want to burden her with too much.
When Michael and I were first, our early part of our relationship, he really wanted to be pretty transparent and let me know what had been going on and what his medical condition was. And being a nurse, he thought, well, it might be helpful to me to kind of understand. I'm not directing things, it's really about his choice, his wishes, what he wants to do or not wants to do, and when he wants to do that.
Advanced care planning is a gift that we can give to our families to let them know what we would like should we become ill, terminally ill, or disabled to the point where we are not able to express our desires.
Don't make it an end-of-life conversation. I don't want to shy away from that. The end-of-life conversation is an important one, but make it a conversation about wishes. And it should be intergenerational. It should be children having conversations with their parents and grandparents and vice versa. I want to have a conversation about what my wishes are and what your wishes are. Maybe we can just share that with each other.
It can be a natural conversation that people start with their loved ones. Just saying, by the way, I've been reading about advanced care planning and I want to give you a gift. This is my gift to you. So somebody in the family needs to start the conversation, and then it can go from there.
There are a variety of elements of advanced directives, and part of it depends on the state that you live in. There are healthcare proxies, there are power of attorneys, there are other forms that exist at a state level. But the important thing to know is what the different forms do in your state. A good resource for this is caringinfo.org, which is a place where folks can go to and search by state to determine what forms exist in their state and what the forms do. If folks don't have an advanced planning document already executed and something happens, it's often too late to execute it. They may lose capacity, they may lose the ability to make a decision themselves. So that also includes the ability to enter into one of these advanced care documents.
Having those conversations before a crisis occurs or before decisions are needed is really a gift for a whole family. It doesn't matter who starts the conversation. It's a gift that removes the burden of uncertainty for some members of a family and then puts a clearer line of responsibility for those who are the decision makers.
So, what is advanced care planning? It is a process that supports adults at any age. In the state of Texas, it's the age of 18, or any stage of health and understanding and sharing their personal values, life goals, and preferences regarding future medical care. This is an important point to make, and that is that at 18 years old, you can create your own advanced directives. And the reason that that's important is because if you are a young adult going off to college, mom and dad no longer have access to your medical records just because they're mom and dad. At the age of 18, you become considered to be able to make your own medical decisions. And therefore, it's important if you, this is why this is an intergenerational conversation, is that if you're a grandparent, it's important to inform your adult children and your grandchildren that they have the right to make this happen. And it's important that it does take place before going off to college, so that if there is a medical power of attorney to be named and it is mom or dad, that gets taken care of, so that if in fact that person who is 18 years old is in an accident, they're able to have someone speak for them that knows what they want and how they want their care to be managed. The goal of ACP, or Advanced Care Plan, is to help ensure that people receive medical care that is consistent with their values, goals, and preferences. It requires communication between patients, their loved ones, and their healthcare providers. This is incredibly important because we live in a village, and basically you keep this information to yourself and it really doesn't help you, nor does it help your loved ones, and it certainly doesn't help your healthcare providers. Your loved ones don't know what it is that you want, and if they're trying to make decisions on your behalf and you're not able to make them for yourself, then I can tell you from the grief perspective and a grief educator's perspective is that grief becomes very complicated afterwards. They walk away from that experience with a tremendous amount of guilt and shame. Did they make the right decision? Is it really what mom or dad really wanted? All that can be avoided by making sure that you communicate what it is that you do want over the course of time. It doesn't have to be one big conversation. These conversations take place over the course of time, and they're revisited on a regular basis. They're encouraged you to revisit your advance directives once a year. It's best done with consideration of the patient's relationship and culture, which will then drive specific medical treatment decisions that can be recorded in an advance directive. So advanced care planning is the process by which we begin to understand what our values are and how they may inform our medical decisions, or what we call care goals. And then they get basically captured in advanced directives, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So it prepares patients for current and future decisions about their medical treatment and place of care. It's a continual process where a patient's current condition and prognosis are reviewed. Preferences for information regarding their illness are elicited, and likely dilemmas are presented and options discussed. Because in a situation like this, as your health changes and as your condition changes, it's important for you to know what your options are. Because keep in mind that we're doing this kind of in a vacuum. We're future projecting, thinking that we know what we want going forward. But once we get there, we may change our mind. And the good thing about advanced directives is you can change your mind in a heartbeat. As long as you have decisional capacity, you can give a verbal instructions on what it is that you want and don't want. Even if you've written something that you wanted today, but once you get there, you change your mind. You can say, wait a minute, I've changed my mind. And so you're not bound, even though it's in writing, you can change that verbally at any moment in time. Cesar, are you still there?
I am.
Okay. Any comments or thoughts about what advanced care planning is?
No, I think you did a great job. I think the video, first time I see that, was exactly on point. I mean, these are exactly the issues that we want to stress when we have these conversations with folks. It's doing the work now so that you don't have to do it later. Now, what I like to tell folks is when I first got out of law school and I worked at a private practice firm for about 10 years, doing, defense work, contract work, all that sort of stuff. And I learned that the ideal contract that a lawyer can draft is one that you don't have to litigate or fight over later, down the line. That's exactly what we want to do with our advanced directives and our advanced care planning documents. Is you want to have those documents set up that they're clear, your directions are clear. You have those conversations with your family, anybody that might be making decisions on your behalf, so that you don't have these fights later on when you're in the hospital, maybe when you lose capacity. And Garrick, you made a comment that folks always have control over their care, whatever care they receive. And they certainly do make some of these decisions at the last minute. This happens way more often, I think, that folks realize, where somebody changes their mind literally at the last minute. I mean, they're coding, they're having, some major event. They change their mind. They tell their physician, their nurse, their treatment team, I want you to do everything, or I want you to do nothing. It goes both ways. So that happens all the time. And I think that's important for folks to remember. It's good to have these conversations. It's good to let folks know what you want done on your behalf. But you always have control until quite literally the very end. And so that's another thing to keep in mind.
That is good
Yeah,
to know.
very important.
And then Garrick, you touched on grief and how it really affects grief. And, I never really thought about that, but yeah, that's a burden that is lifted from them if they have that in order already.
Yeah. And it's one of those things you don't think much about necessarily, but when you are in a situation where you're listening to people have gone through that, and I've heard many stories where people have argued about what to do. And I walked into a number of ICUs as a chaplain and heard patients, families arguing with each other, yelling at each other. And this is where the adage "death divides" comes to mind, because there are stories I've heard where siblings haven't talked to each other in years since mom died, and so that's all avoidable potentially by stepping into the role of just informing and sharing and notifying and making sure that that is as clear, like Sue was saying, make it as clear as possible. And in writing is where the advanced directive comes in handy for the family, because then whoever the medical power of attorney is can refer back to this document when things get emotional, and they will get emotional. I mean, you're losing your loved one, someone that is cared for you and looked after you, and something you revere and holds a very, very, very special place in your heart. And so it's important that you acknowledge the fact that it's going to get emotional, but these documents can help guide, can help be the roadmap for navigating through this journey. And the other thing that's so precious about this is that with these documents in place, you're able to, as the caregiver, as the person who's supporting your loved one as they're getting ready to pass, is you're able to be more present with them, not necessarily concerned about making some heavy decisions, and not being tied up in that, and your attention taken away from the sacredness of the moment. But you're free to be present in that moment in a way that you wouldn't be if you had to be making some of these difficult decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this may be an overgeneralization, but those situations that Garrick just described, where the families are getting into these interfamily fights over what decision to make for their loved one. I would guess that more often than not, if that fight was going to happen, it's going to happen no matter if it's 5 minutes before the loved one dies, 5 months before the loved one dies, or 5 years before the loved one dies. And so, again, you don't want to go into the hospital, or you don't want to have your treatment team having to make these decisions in real time while families having a disagreement or a fight, really. So again, if it's going to happen, we would prefer, obviously the hospitals would prefer, but it's better for that fight to happen 5 years, before these issues really need to come up. We have had some hospitals that are a little bit more advanced in their advanced care planning programs, run a couple of studies, a couple of pilots, if you will. And it really, there's a marked improvement when the providers, the ACP teams come in and start that counseling and start that grief process and start this whole ball rolling weeks, months, hopefully 6 months, 12 months before that loved one is expected to pass. And really that helps smooth a lot of these issues over. Again, as opposed to just having these arguments, having these discussions, having to make these decisions in the heat of the moment when it's really time to go. And folks, again, can't make decisions, and these things sort of start to play out. So again, from the hospital's perspective, really from the provider's perspective, I think the more that you can resolve these issues well in advance, the better off everyone's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. Okay. So let's go back now to some slides here and just kind of continue our conversation about why it's important. As in our next break, I'm going to go ahead and look up a document that I'm going to share with you that has 19 reasons why advanced care planning is important, each one of those backed up by a published paper in a medical journal. So there's some heavy evidence that, and like Cesar was talking about in particular, when in fact you're in a hospital setting, if you have this done prior to, then the anxiety about what's taking place is dialed down to a level that is manageable versus it being out of control, which means your outcomes, the actual outcome of the support that you're receiving, the medical care you're receiving, actually are far greater, far better than the outcomes with advanced care planning is not done. So ACP, or advanced care planning, helps to ensure that the patients receive care that is consistent with their preference, their goals, their values, aims to provide guidance to the family, and reduces the decisional burden about whether they're following these preferences. This is an important part which we just talked about. It also provides some really important support for the medical team. Your medical team, the most important thing I can stress for you, having gone through this with my late wife for 4 years, 3 months, and 2 weeks after her diagnosis, was that taking a team approach and including your medical care team in your conversations about your advanced directives is absolutely critical to ensure that everyone's on the same page, literally, that you actually are all talking about what it is that you want versus them off by themselves and then only coming in at certain moments in time to talk to you, but they're really part of the understanding of what it is that you want. It lays the groundwork for surrogates, which are loved ones, healthcare agents, or proxy. In the state of Texas, you're called a healthcare agent as a medical power of attorney, by providing a framework that they can be utilized to inform decision-making, keeping in mind the patient's goals, values, beliefs, as well as their treatment preferences. And this is the other piece that's important as a consideration for everyone involved, is it reduces the moral distress among healthcare providers as well. I mean, as a healthcare provider, they're there to provide the best care possible for you. And of course, that means to them that they oftentimes feel that they failed if you die. And so if they know that you're going in a way that is in accordance with your preferences and your beliefs and your values, then it makes it a lot easier for the healthcare providers, the healthcare doctors and nurses and such, to be able to know that they're doing what it is that you wanted in relationship to what you valued most. So the 3 Ds of advanced care planning. The first of the 3 Ds is how to make sound decisions about your end-of-life wishes and who might be the best person to make medical decisions for you if you are unable. And this is the point that it's important for people to really embrace, is the fact that you have a choice. Forces beyond our control can take away anything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. So Viktor Frankl, as you know, is a survivor of Auschwitz and wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is, profoundly popular. Millions of copies have been sold. But here is a man who's gone through one of the most horrific situations anyone could find themselves in. And, he wrote this book about choice and the fact that you have a choice as to how you respond to the situation. So it is your voice. You have the voice. It's your life. It's your body. It's your choice. So coming to an event like this, an activity like this, is really important for you. Congratulations for being here, because you're willing to take and really come to terms with the reality of your own mortality. And in doing so, you're able to live more freely and more aligned with what it is that you value most. And so this exercise of going through your advanced care planning, doing your advanced directives, gives you the opportunity really to live fully and a richer life, because you've overcome or been in the process of overcoming your fear of death at the same, which frees you up tremendously, and also puts you in touch with a closer touch and more deeper understanding perhaps of what you value most. So what are your end-of-life wishes? So what matters most at the end of life is, this is how you might come to terms with, just kind of reviewing and reflecting upon, you might want to let nature take its course, or you want to, you're about preserving the quality of life. As an example, if someone would say to me, I'm 3 weeks out from my departure, they said, well, we got this brand new drug, just came on the market, just became FDA approved, and we'd like to offer it to you. There's a chance that it might help. And I'd say, well, you think I have about 3 weeks left, maybe 4 weeks left. And I'd have to say, well, what are the side effects? What would my quality of life be like between now and the end of my life? And they say, well, you're going to have, it's chemo, and you're going to feel nauseous, going to feel sick, and you may be kind of out of it and so forth. And for me, I'd say, well, the quality of my life is far more important. Even if I was only had a week versus 3 weeks, I want to be able to spend it consciously with my loved ones. And so my decision would be, I'd probably pass on the drug that may have that 1% chance of having an effect at the end of life. And so those are the kind of decisions that I can come to, because I've taken the time to realize that being with my family, and certainly after my experience with my late wife, she was cognitive, she was alert and aware, and right into the last breath. So she was a real inspiration for me to realize the quality of life is the most important thing for me. And it's not for everybody. And that's the whole point. There's no right or wrong answer here. The only answer that's right is the answer you want to give based upon your values, your goals, and your preferences. Staying true to my spiritual beliefs and traditions, living as long as possible, regardless of the quality of life, certainly a way of going as well. Being independent. I mean, everybody wants to be independent and be able to do what they need to do without necessarily a lot of assistance. Being comfortable, as pain-free as possible. And that is possible with palliative care in particular. There's a specialty that's come online in the last, what has it been, Cesar, 4 or 5 years? Nancy, help me out here. I think it's been around 4 or 5 years, maybe, where doctors go to get trained on special training on palliative care, which is comfort care, basically. So there's no reason for you to be in pain is the point. And they can help you with pain management. So leaving good memories for my family and friends, making contributions to medical research or teaching. Some people want to donate their bodies, a whole body donation. Nancy, the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Central Texas can certainly give you more information about that. Being able to relate to family and friends, and that certainly was the case with Kinslow, my late wife. She wanted to, there were people in the room just moments before she She passed because she wanted to be with her friends. Being free of physical limitations. My father recently died, and he basically said, he had COVID and his blood oxygen levels were dropping, and he was not going to go to the hospital because he had some physical limitations that really bothered him. He said, I don't want to go through the hospital situation. And frankly, I've lived 89 years, been a fantastic life, and I'm out of here. So he decided not to do anything about it and passed away peacefully a few hours later. Being mentally alert and competent, being able to leave money to family, friends, and charity, dying more quickly rather than lingering. My dad was very funny. My dad said to my sister, he said, I had no idea dying was so hard. He said, and then a few minutes later he says, hey, can you give me something to move this along? Because I'm not comfortable. I want to move along here. So that was my dad's perspective. Avoiding expensive care. So the homework for this, in order to help you kind of move to the next step in understanding what it is that you might capture and understanding, engage in a conversation, a dialogue with yourself and perhaps your loved ones as well, is to download this document. It's called your Conversation Starter Guide from the Conversation Project. And it will still walk you through step by step how to come to a deeper understanding. There's some workbook activities in there that give you an opportunity to really dive into what it is that you can do in order to come to a clear understanding as to what your wishes might, finally get down on paper and see them, what they are. Thoughts, Cesar, comments, questions about the first of the 3 Ds, which is decide what it is that your wishes might be and who will be your medical power of attorney, which we're going to talk to in a moment.
So one quick note, just remember, folks, that your directives can go any way you want them to go. Most folks, for probably good reason, think that if they fill out and sign an advance directive, it means they're going to be kind of DNR by default. That's not the case. I mean, you can have a directive that says, I want everything done. You can have a directive that says, I want nothing done. You can have a directive that says something in between. So again, the decision is ultimately up to you. That's codified in state law. The hospital will do everything they can to honor any reasonable requests. Of course, we can't do anything that's illegal or improper, medically inappropriate, but as long as those requests are reasonable, the hospital will do everything they can to try to abide by those. So I usually tell folks, when you get your directive, loaded up, go beyond even issues related to care. Like if you want a certain member of the clergy to come visit or something like that, I think that's appropriate to put in your directive. I mean, I wouldn't have a, appendix with 20 pages or something like that on there, but certainly the things that matter most to you at the end of life that you would think you would want to have at the end of life, those are the things you should try to load your directive up with.
I really like those boxes, Garrick, that you put together. What matters most? That really clears things up for life.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that Cesar made a very good point about the fact that there's something in between. It doesn't have to be black and white where it is all or nothing. There can be what's called trial periods where you will have a period of time, and this is particularly with head injuries, where you have a period of time where you are kind of finding out what's going on with the body. And so you may have a period of, say, at the end of 7 days, if the doctors don't feel that I'm going to be able to return to the life that I want, then let me go. But give that 7-day period versus, the first time you arrest, you might say, I'm out. That would be the black and white decision. Versus, give it time. Let the medical professionals do their job. Let them do their magic. And then let's take a look in 7 days or 10 days, whatever the number is that you're most comfortable with, that for that particular situation gives you a chance. Or like antibiotics. You may say, well, gee whiz, I don't want antibiotics if I don't have to. Well, there may be a situation where you say, let's try them for 3 to 5 days and see if they work. If they do, so as an example, you may have something called cellulitis, and antibiotics are perfect for that. And that is, just kind of an opportunistic infection. But if you get it under control, everything else will, amp up and you'll be able to survive it. But if you just say no antibiotics and you have cellulitis, then they're duty bound to say no antibiotics, even though it's cellulitis. And that's where they kind of gets Now you can get also head crazy because you can make 1,000 different scenarios. And like Cesar's saying, you can have a book full of options, but the general idea is that if you're medical power of attorney, you're not able to speak for yourself or yourself, that you have the gist and the understanding of what it is that you want, that you can navigate these nuances along the way as well, and still remain true to your preferences, your goals of care that you want. Okay, let's return to the slides if I can find them again. Where are they? Here we go. Okay, so here we were downloading this particular document. And when you open this as in a PDF, this particular address should be live, so you'll be able to access it. So the next decision of the two decisions that are critical in making here are who will speak for you when you are unable. And maybe, Cesar, you could speak to how it becomes a situation where someone speaks for you. What happens at the hospital level? What happens with the doc as to when they declare you not able to speak for yourself?
Sure, happy to do that. So I'm going to try to do this in very sort of general, broad terms. Of course, there's a ton of nuance here, but generally, Chapter 166 of the Health and Safety Code, which is where all these directives live, and I use directive in the general sense. So when I say directive, I mean an advance directive, I mean a medical power of attorney, I mean an out-of-hospital DNR order, and there's now an in-hospital DNR order, which we can talk about, but isn't really something that average person can fill out. It's really something for the physicians inside the hospital to take care of. But to answer your question, Garrick, 166, Chapter 166 of the Health and Safety Code really only applies when an individual has a terminal or irreversible condition. Now, what that is generally, again, broadly defined as in statute, is the patient is expected to die within 6 months, regardless of the provision of life-sustaining treatment. So no matter what you do to this patient, to this individual, no matter what kind of care we provide to them, that individual's physician, in their best medical judgment, expects that patient to die within 6 months. That's really when all of these directives and all of these sort of things kick in. So that's part one. Part two is the capacity issue that Garrick, you just referenced. So capacity means that you have the ability to understand what's going on. You have the ability to comprehend the treatment choices that are being offered to you that you might want to select from. A medical professional, again, I'm paraphrasing here and I'm being incredibly general, but when the physician makes a determination that the individual has lost the ability to comprehend that medical professional can no longer have a sort of adequate, fair conversation with the patient over the decisions that are about to be made or that are being discussed, the physician will make a determination that that person has lost capacity, and that's when a lot of these directives will take place. Now, I think it is possible, although you hardly ever see it, for a medical power of attorney to take effect immediately, even if the individual does have capacity. The default is that it only kicks in when that individual loses capacity. So again, you have to have both of those things take place. But again, that's maybe the only caveat there. But hopefully, Garrick, that answered the question. Again, I know there's a lot more nuance to it. And we can certainly, if anyone wants to have that discussion offline, I'm happy to make myself available and we can get into some of that nitty gritty. Yeah.
No, that's in my understanding too, is the doctor has to, make that decision and that enters into the chart, and that's when the medical power of attorney can come into the picture,
right,
and start answering questions and start making decisions on behalf of the patient.
Right, and remember the key here is that we want to make sure that the patient controls their own care. So the statute and the law is set up sort of with that presumption in mind. So it really is a couple of hoops you have to jump through to get to the point where somebody else can come in and stand in the shoes of the patient. And that's exactly what something like the medical power of attorney does. So when that medical power of attorney kicks in, let's say my wife is my MPOA, I'm a medical power of attorney. She or whoever is named as my power of attorney basically acts in my stead, does everything that I'm able to do. The hospital has to give that person access to my records as if it were me. The hospital has to get permission from that power of attorney for any care that they're going to provide to me as if it were me. So it's basically a stand-in, for that patient. And so again, when you think of it that way, it makes sense why the presumption is set up the way that it's set up, and why it's a little more difficult than one might think to get to the point where these directives kick in. Again, it has to be usually within that 6-month window. There has to be a medical determination of loss of competency. And of course, as Garrick pointed out, you have to have that documented and put into the record.
So the person that we're referring to is called a healthcare agent in the state of Texas. Other states are called healthcare proxy. We also refer to it in the state of Texas as a medical power of attorney, and then also a power of attorney for healthcare versus a durable power of attorney, which is for your finances. The power of attorney for healthcare is for your medical care. The durable power of attorney is for your finances, and there the twain should meet. Nor should they be the same person, because there's an intrinsic conflict of interest.
Yeah, good point, Garrick. And keep in mind, even I do this all the time. When I have these discussions with folks, I use terms interchangeably when I'm referring to that agent, surrogate. I use agent, surrogate, guardian, legal guardian. I mean, there's probably a 10 to 12 terms that you can use for that to describe that same individual. So a lot of times folks will get mixed up with that. And again, that's just, us folks that kind of live in this world, we're so used to kind of seeing these different terms thrown around. Generally, I use them, again, interchangeably to mean the same thing. So if you guys have any questions when those come up, please make sure you ask those, and we'll try to clarify.
So what they're going to do is they're going to make medical decisions for you if you're unable. Talk with your docs, consult your medical records, make decisions about tests, procedures, and other treatments. And of course, they're doing that based upon you informing them and having multiple conversations with them about what your preferences are in a healthcare situation. The keys that you're going to be looking for them to be able to actually, the qualities you're looking for will be the person to make decisions that are in line with your wishes. Obviously, you want somebody who's going to speak for you as if it was you speaking. Will they be comfortable speaking on your behalf? And will the person be good at making decisions in changing circumstances, and particularly in a situation where they're talking to doctors who are very, very powerful and very competent in what they do, but you're going to need someone who's going to be able to stand toe-to-toe with a doc and say yes or no. But again, based upon not power play, not our knowledge, not being equal as far as knowledge of how medicine works, but certainly being the authority in the room as to what it is that you want with regards to your goals and your preferences. So the homework here is to download this particular guide from the Conversation Project called Your Guide to Choosing a Healthcare Proxy. They use the word proxy because it seems to be one of those words that used, but again, it's the person in Texas is called a healthcare agent, but this kind of walks you through step-by-step how to choose a healthcare proxy. So you're making a good decision, a decision that's in alignment with what it is that you value most, and certainly having someone speak on your behalf that's aligned with your values is the critical objective here. The second of the 3 Ds is discuss. How to discuss your end-of-life wishes with your loved ones and your healthcare professionals. Obviously, that's one of those challenging things that we take a look at because people oftentimes are not comfortable talking about having that end-of-life conversation. So the key here is to, again, come back to your conversation starter guide and go to page 8. And this kind of walks you through step by step in this guide as to what it is that who, when, where, what do you want to be sure to say? Because keep in mind, in the earlier part of this particular workbook, you're actually going through the process of coming in touch with, becoming more clear perhaps about what your medical choices are. So you're prepared to have this conversation. And then what this does is this kind of walks you through how preparing for the conversation, including icebreakers that kind of give you an idea of how it is that you begin the conversation. Simply by saying, I need your help with something. I attended a webinar recently and it got me to thinking. Or, remember what happened to Uncle Bill about 2 years ago, how much difficulty Aunt Sally had in understanding what it is that she needed to do in order to support him at the end of her life. Well, I really don't want that kind of discomfort, and I don't want that kind of hurt, for you guys. I want you kids to be able to know exactly what I want, and I've taken some time to prepare, and I'd just like to share that with you. But really find out where that person is at before you have the conversation. Keep in mind that here you are, you're going through the process, you're all fired up, you're aware of what it is, you're excited about the fact you're slowly becoming aware of and overcoming your fear of death. and now you're coming to someone who hasn't done any of this work. So you've got to be gentle and kind and really find out how you can meet them where they are. And so some of these icebreakers are really helpful in being able to begin that conversation. I need to think about the future. Will you help me? So that engages them and pulls them into the conversation versus you just downloading all of a sudden say, hey, let's talk about death and dying. How about that? Let's have a cup of coffee and we'll have a chat. That sometimes doesn't work so well. So really be kind to yourself and be kind to them as well. Tips for talking, be patient. Don't steer the conversation. Keep in mind this is a conversation that's not one and done. It's a conversation that takes place on multiple times over the course of time. Don't judge. Nothing is set in stone. Every conversation is valuable as a move forward. Even though you think, well, we didn't accomplish what I thought I would accomplish. Gosh darn it. Well, let go of your judgment, let go of your expectations, and allow the conversation to unfold and realize that you can come back to it. And this is so important. This is the first of many conversations, not just one, but many. Making sure you keep talking. Really, really important. You might want to repeat or explain again so you're sure your trusted people understand what's important to you. Who do you want to talk to next time? Who do you want to include, as you include more people about what your wishes are? But keep the conversation going. All right. How to talk to healthcare professionals is the second step in this process. And that's where you're going to download this document. This document is extremely helpful in helping you guide you through the conversation with your healthcare team. My late wife, Kinslow, took an approach that she wanted a team, and that team was to be informed of what her wishes were. And so we were actively involved and engaged in those conversations each time we visited with them as her healthcare and her health decisions and her health condition continued to change. You're the expert about what matters most to you. Let your healthcare team know what your end of life goals and preferences are. Bring a completed copy of your living will and your medical power of attorney advance directives with you to your conversation with the doctor. I believe that in January 1st of 2016, Medicare started paying for doctors for having end of life conversations with at the wellness visits, so that the doctor is reimbursed, and the doctor doesn't even have to have the conversation. They just need to be in the building when the conversation takes place. There are two different CPT codes that they use in order to get reimbursed. One is for the initial conversation, and the second code is for follow-up. So there is more than just a one visit conversation the doctor can have to you about your end of life care. Keep in mind the doctors are humans, and they may have their own preferences and concerns about what you do and what you don't do. But again, this is your wishes, this is your life, your body, your choice, your voice. So you just have to have the conversation with them and make sure they're on the same team as you. And if they're not, then you might want to consider making a change, just because you want to make sure everybody is on your team is on your team. These are the things you want to talk to them about in regards to healthcare, hospice care, palliative care. Talk about what shared decision-making looks like between the two of you, and review your advance directives in intimate detail, making sure they have a copy, and that copy is put in your medical records at their office. Keep in mind that you're talking to your PCP, but keep in mind also that you're going to be talking to any one of the specialists on your healthcare team, your oncologist, your urologist, your cardio guy or gal that really is taking care of your heart, making sure everybody has a copy. One of the things that Nancy and I talked about early on in this process of doing this work was making sure that you get the advance directives done, you copy, and then you distribute with abandon, making sure everybody in your on your team and involved in your healthcare has a copy. You also want to talk about intubation, artificial nutrition, hydration, CPR, comfort care, limited trial for aggressive care, what we're talking about earlier. You have trial periods for the kind of care that you want. So these are some of the things you want to talk with your doctor about. Now we get into the juicy stuff, and this is where Cesar has just a wealth of knowledge about how these documents work. So I think what we're going to do is that this form is your directed to physician and family or surrogates, and if I'm lucky, we'll be able to bring the form up. And can you see the form on the screen?
Cannot.
You cannot.
And Garrick, while you're pulling that up, I mean, I just want to hit on a couple of points that you just went over. One, having these discussions with your friends, family, loved ones, talking through your wishes and desires. Those are, as Garrick has already sort of said a bunch, very difficult conversations to have. You know, and that's just the way they are. I mean, that's where folks like Garrick and these organizations come into play and really help sort of bridge that gap and make sure that that an individual is able to have those conversations meaningfully, clearly, you know, have folks understand what they're trying to have done here. I think, Garrick, I've told you this story, and this is just a personal story, but about 10 years ago, when I was about 2 or 3 years out of law school, I had an uncle invite me to lunch, and you know, when I sat down to meet with him, I could tell he was visibly nervous. I mean, he was visibly shaking to the point that I thought somebody was sick. He was sick. My aunt was sick. My cousins were sick. Something like that. And what he wanted to talk about was how to prepare a will and how to prepare his advanced care documents, his advanced directive, and the like. And that's really when it dawned on me that this really is a big issue and really is an issue that folks struggle, you know, to have that conversation and overcome those sort of fears and concerns. So again, I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but it's a very important conversation, and it's important to have this conversation with anybody that might be put in a situation where they have to make a decision for a patient on that patient's behalf, on that individual's behalf. You want to make sure that they are fully aware of, again, we keep saying this, but what that individual wants and are willing to make that decision. I think that's probably the biggest, most important part is you want to make sure that somebody is comfortable, you know, doing whatever is asked of them at the point that they are going to be asked to do that. The second point, again, Garrick sort of hit on, make sure you tell all of your providers that you have these documents. We have seen patients go as far as giving a copy of all their documents to their primary care doctor, to everybody at their local hospital, to their local EMS company, you know, that they expect would come and, you know, maybe come to their house and try to, you know, provide services at their house or take them to the hospital or revive them really at home. And even go as far as taping copies of their directives to the front door, back door, to the fridge, you know, any sort of those high traffic areas in and around the house. Folks even go as far as wearing sort of the medical bracelets, the necklaces, you know, saying do not resuscitate, and probably in most situations where they have those types of jewelry. We've even had stories of folks getting tattoos on their chest, basically saying do not resuscitate, DNR, something to that effect.
That's not legal.
Right, I know, but I mean, you know, we hear stories of folks doing that, and again, whether it's illegal or not legal, folks are still doing it. That's how much they care about these issues. That's how important these issues are. And again, it doesn't have to be DNR. It could be full code. We want you to do everything. Again, I don't want to sort of lean one way or another, but just know that some folks understand the importance of this, take it to, I wouldn't say an extreme, but take it, you know, as far as they possibly can, and make sure they make it known to, you know, everyone in their world that this is what they want.
So let's take a look at the paper. This is the beginning of what we call an advanced directive. This is the first of the advanced directives we call a directive to physician and family or surrogates. This is the statutory document for the state of Texas. Each state has its own. And so you go to a place like careinfo.org, or you go to prepareforyourcare.org, or you go to the American Bar Association or Compassion and Choices. All those organizations have these documents in a form that you can actually walk through and complete the directives. This happens to be the forms that we use in the state of Texas. Is there anything you want to say to this, speak to this form that you want to point out here, Cesar?
So this is the form, and this is what I tell folks. What I mean by that is, if you're only going to fill out one form, you know, after this conversation, this is the form that you want to execute. This directive one can really be in any sort of form, and that'll make sense when we get to the next form, the MPOA. But again, the state has a general form available for everybody online. You can basically just go in and search for Texas Advanced Directive, and this exact form will show up. It's easy to populate. You put in your name, you check one of these boxes. Basically, I want everything done, I want nothing done. And then if you go to the second page, there should be some blank lines there for you to basically at the top there to kind of fill in, like I said, those other sort of other requests that you may have. Again, whether it's clergy or I want, certain flowers in my room or music played or whatever. Again, it should be mostly healthcare related, but again, I've seen folks go a little beyond that into some really specific healthcare issues.
The thing I want to point out here too, Cesar, is in this section earlier where we talked about everything done or nothing done, it's based upon two different conditions, whether you have a terminal condition or whether you have an irreversible condition where you make a decision. And what we're recommending is that you actually initial these instead of just X them or check them, but actually initial which one it is so it's clear that you actually did you were the one who actually made the choice and the decision.
Right, good point. And again, that's where we get into those terminal and irreversible condition definitions that we talked about 15 minutes ago. I think most importantly here in the middle of this second page, the advanced directive form this form that you can pull off the state's website does allow you to name your medical power of attorney and your alternate medical power of attorney in this document. So what I tell folks, and again, why I say this is the document, is you can do your directive. You can have your directive and your MPOA in one document and kind of be done with both of those through just one document. You do have the option, and we'll get to that here in a minute, but you do have an option of having a separate medical power of attorney document. So you would have your directive and then your MPOA, your medical power of attorney document. So two documents, but again, there's really no need to do that if you go through and do it in this one document. So again, I think that's important. I always remind folks to be sure to, put in a name or two, or maybe even 3 or 4 if you want to have a couple of alternates of folks that would be called upon to make these decisions in the event that you lose capacity.
And then this requires witnessing. It doesn't require a notary.
Right. So you generally have the option of doing either or. Some folks actually do both. Some folks will have 2 witnesses and a notary, but you really don't need both. I would say most documents have just the 2 witnesses. It's going to be probably the easiest thing to do unless you have easy access to a notary. I'll tell you, my directive has just the 2 witnesses. I don't have a notary signature notarization on my document. Bear in mind that there is some potential to require this, what we call the sort of perfect stranger witness. If one of the witnesses is related to the principal, so that if it's your document, if one of your witnesses is related to you by blood, by marriage, might take from you under your estate, maybe as your attending physician or works for your attending physician, there's a list of folks here in this paragraph right above the witness block that basically says if one of the witnesses is X, Y, or Z, the second witness must not. So that usually is where folks get tripped up in filling out this directive. They don't understand how the witness requirements work. It's really not that difficult. I like to remind folks it's not not to look at it in the negative, but just say one of the witnesses can be one of the following. So you can go through this list of one of your witnesses is related or entitled to take part of your estate. That's okay. One of the witnesses can be one of those folks as long as the second witness is not. So I think that usually helps folks understand that a little bit easier. But again, any questions on the nuances there, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to work through that with you. We actually have a 1-page matrix that we developed for folks to kind of, if this, then that, if that, then this type of decision-making tree. So again, if you have any questions, just let us know. I'm happy to work through all that with y'all.
Thank you. Okay, let's then the rest of this is definitions, which are for your own edification. Let's go back now to our slides and take a look at what it is that we're going to go to our next document. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so the next document we're going to be talking about is your medical power of attorney. And that's what this document looks like, which can you see that on screen yet or no? Nope, okay, so let me go back over. Zoom does not make it easy. Okay, so here's the medical power of attorney and a few minutes here before we start to wrap up.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about the main things you want to mention here, Cesar?
So 2 big things right off the bat. One, I mentioned that the advanced directive that we just looked at is the document. Again, you can make your MPOA, medical power of attorney designation within that directive. You can also, if you like, have a separate medical power of attorney designation. The one thing that I will tell folks that I've learned really in the last couple of years is the worst thing that a patient can come into the hospital with in these end of life situations is just this sort of basic medical power of attorney document and nothing else. Because all this document does, and what I mean by that is all this document does is name your medical power of attorney and name alternate medical power of attorneys in case that original, the principal power of attorney is unable to serve. So you can name your spouse. If your spouse is unavailable, your backup is an adult child. If that adult child is unavailable, your backup to that, your third option is a neighbor. And basically the physician, the hospital will kind of go through that list and make sure they can try to find one of those individuals to make these decisions for you. Now, the reason I say the worst thing a patient can do is come in with just this medical power of attorney document and nothing else is this doesn't have those spaces that we saw in the directive that allow for the patient to, check boxes or lay out their wishes and make their wishes otherwise known. What we see in a lot of situations in our hospitals is the patient will come in, they'll come in and lose capacity or come in without capacity from the get-go, and they will have a medical power of attorney document, which is great. Most folks probably don't have one of these filled out, but they'll have this document filled out, and again, nothing else. So the hospital, the providers reach out to that medical power of attorney, let's say it's spouse, neighbor, child, parent, whoever it may be. And it turns out that that patient and that individual that's named as the power of attorney never had a conversation. Oftentimes that power of attorney didn't even know that they were named under the medical power of attorney document. So they had no idea that when this situation arose, if and when it did arise, that they would be called upon to make these decisions for the patient. So we spent 30, 40 minutes already talking about how stressful these types of issues are, how stressful these conversations are, how difficult it is for an individual to come in and make these decisions on behalf of a loved one. Imagine now that individual that's being called upon to make those decisions for an incapacitated loved one had no idea that they were going to be asked to do this, had no direction from the patient as to what the patient would have wanted in these situations. And so they're basically just coming in, they're afraid, they're terrified to make the wrong decision. They want to do right by everybody involved. Maybe it's a big family and there's a lot of kids involved or something like that. So again, if you take nothing away from this conversation today, make sure you fill out at least your advance directive. You can certainly fill out an MPOA form if you'd like to have one in addition to your directive, but make sure that those individuals that are going to be called upon potentially to make these decisions know that they're
they're designated.
That they're being designated, that potential is out there, and that they're comfortable doing this should the need arise. Second point I want to make, and this is an important one, I mentioned with the directive, the document that we just looked at, it can be in any form. With regards to the medical power of attorney, this form that we're on now, it has to be in this specific form that we're looking at here, that is in law. So whereas I tell folks you could have your directive filled out on the back of a napkin, it doesn't have to be in any particular form, fashion, etc. The medical power of attorney form in Texas, a Texas medical power of attorney form has to be in this specific form. You have to pull down that same form from the state's website, which is what we're looking at here. And so again, if somebody comes in with what is claimed to be a Texas MPOA form and it doesn't look like this, and your hospital gets a hold of it, legal is going to look at it and say something's not right about this, it doesn't meet statutory requirements, there's a potential that it gets kicked out, or that the hospital is unable to comply with it. So again, you want to make sure that you pull down the specific state mandated form for the medical power of attorney.
Yeah, and you keep in mind that you've got this link that leads us, as we just saw, to this form. This KIP form gives you an opportunity to also name your first alternate and your second alternate. And you can also specify a date in which it ends if you need to. If you were having a dental procedure, whatnot, that might be appropriate for just that particular incident. But for what we're talking about, typically, this is not completed or filled out. In this form, you could either have either or. There's more definitions and explanations. You could either have a notary, or there's a big or right here that you can have just simply witnessed by two competent witnesses. So let's go to our final document, which is the document for out of hospital do not resuscitate. This is just another form that has to do with having a out of hospital DNR, which means that you have a chance to specify that you do not want to have CPR administered outside of the hospital. This is only if you are not a patient at a hospital. If you're in hospital, and you've been admitted, then there's a whole different process of requesting a DNR, do not resuscitate or allow natural death. This is an out-of-hospital DNR. It's very relatively complex. Make sure you read it completely, particularly the back of this form is very detailed, requires 2 signatures by the doctor and 2 signatures by yourself and witnesses. So make sure that you look at this in great detail before you execute it. And this is a document you actually would send off and receive back from an organization. I think you pay like $35, $40 a year in order to have some jewelry, which would be in the form of a wristband or a pendant, where you have an opportunity to identify as having that on file, so that if in fact you're in the street and EMS happens to see it, then they're supposed to call that number, verify that you have a DNR out of hospital DNR in the state of Texas, and they're not supposed to administer CPR in an ideal world.
Yeah, and so another couple of points. All that was exactly on point, Garrick. But this is another form that has to be in this statutorily required form. So again, you would have to go and pull down this specific form off the state's webpage. You want to make sure it looks exactly like this. This is a document that I kind of referenced earlier that folks will tape up to their doorways, front door, back door, refrigerator, things like that. Make sure that they know that they have this out-of-hospital DNR order in place and executed. This is a little bit more of a, I would call maybe a limited use document, in the sense that, you know, I am not quite 40, but I'm pushing 40. I do have an advance directive. I do have an MPOA form. I do not have an out-of-hospital DNR order. It just wouldn't really be appropriate for me at this point to have one, but certainly there are going to be folks that want to make sure that they have this document in place. Again, that's a conversation I would encourage folks to have with their medical provider. And
also, do you think, Cesar, to do some research on CPR and CPR efficacy based upon healthcare condition?
Yeah, again, I think that's a hyper-specific conversation that patient wants to have with their doctor. They want to be certain that they do want this order in place, because again, as Garrick indicated in a very general sense, this basically says, if I have a heart attack at home and 911 is called, EMS shows up to my house, they know I have this DNR order, they're not going to attempt to resuscitate me. Basically, they're just going to let me go naturally. Again, that's a sort of a crude, simple way to describe it, but that's essentially the idea behind this document. So again, I just want to make sure that folks know that that is what this does. And then the last part that I just want to touch on, again, as Garrick mentioned, this is, and as the form says, this is only for use in out-of-hospital settings. So it's going to be your home, it's going to be a vehicle, it's going to be an ambulance, it's going to be the ER. Really is defined as an out-of-hospital setting. Everything outside of being admitted to a hospital, nursing home, hospice, all that, this document should apply under a law. It will not apply within the hospital. Once you're admitted to a hospital, you're gonna have to go through a different process for that. As long as you have your directive in place, it shouldn't really be an issue. But again, this is just for anything outside of the actual inpatient part of the hospital.
Yeah, the most time I've seen it is typically with someone who's on hospice and is really clear about not receiving CPR. They have this document executed. And the idea is the EMS is trained to look for it on the headboard or on the refrigerator. My wife had one, but she refused to put it on the headboard, so she had it at the foot of the bed. So the bottom line is that there's easily accessible and viewable by EMS if in fact they were called. And oftentimes it happens if in fact, you know, someone is part of your care team that happens to be not necessarily up to speed on everything, but they just happen to drop by and you went out to get medications and they freaked out when you had an arrest and they called 911. Because typically, you know, the person who's caring for you and you have an out-of-hospital DNR, they typically will not call 911. Okay, so let's go back one more and we're gonna be on our way to being complete here. Questions, give us a call. It's in the document. You know how to get in touch with us. Keep in mind that if in fact you want to dive deeper into this topic, I'm going to be doing a webinar series on the 13th, 20th, and 27th of May, 10:30 to 12. We're going to dive deeply into each aspect of the decide, discuss, and document of the 3 Ds of advanced care planning.
Hey, Garrick, I had a Nancy put in the chat that Texas HB 936 is seeking to add a what's valid layer to the directive to physicians.
So do you see that, Cesar, in the chat box? HB 936?
Yeah, and this is one bill that we certainly have our eyes on. It has not been sort of set for a hearing yet, so I don't know that it's actually going to get any traction, but we've certainly reviewed it. It's been a couple of weeks now, but we reviewed it and we're monitoring it.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. Hey, Andrea, so basically, if there's any questions, just give us a call, let us know. We're happy to answer them. Attend the May event if you want. It's free. Go onto the kitchentableconversations.org website. After this week, the registration will be open. People can register to this free event. So thank you all for allowing us to be here, both being sponsored here by Meals on Wheels and also by Lloyd and people at Sonder Hospice. We appreciate the opportunity to come to you and get this recorded and have people be able to review this and come back to some very good information that was shared, particularly by Cesar with regards to some of the legal, more intricate and in-depth information that is important to know. It's just good to know, so you can make good informed decisions.
I know, definitely, I have learned so much just in this 50 mintes. Thank you so much.
There's a lot out there.
Yeah.
Thank y'all. It's been tremendous.
I appreciate y'all's time. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely get this